Hi guys, it's Cersei. Welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up. I ended up reading only 6 books in January, which is partly due to the fact that largely due to the fact that I obviously had like finals, a lot of exams and stuff like that, and I just really didn't get a lot of time to actively read. I'm still pretty happy with that number because at least I read something, right? And I'm really hoping to bump that number up quite a bit higher in February, so all's good. Before we get started, please don't forget to like this video if you're enjoying it and subscribe to my channel. I upload every Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday. And now, let's jump into the wrap-up. So as always, we're gonna start with some stats. So as I said, I read 6 books this month. I ended up rating 3 of them 3 stars and 3 4 stars, so that's pretty great. Average rating of 3.5. In terms of genres, I had 3 fantasy books, 2 nonfiction, and 1 fiction. In terms of pages, that all came to 1,976 pages, which means I read about 64 a day, and the average length of the books was like 329 pages a book. For settings, I had 2 set in like a general world setting and then 1 each in the US, Greece, Australia, and Russia. For authors, exactly half of them were new to me or not, and the same goes for the hype, so 3 hyped, 3 more obscure books. And lastly, for release years, they were all released between the year 2000 and 2018. So let's start with the book that I rated probably more like a 2.5, but since there's only like proper full ratings, I kind of bumped it up to 3, and that is The Brides of Rollrock Island by Margot Lanigan. This book is very weird. It was sold to me kind of, or at least based on the synopsis, I felt like it was kind of a book about sirens. Basically, it's set in a small island community where there's sort of a pattern of witches calling forth women from the sea, so they turn the seals that are on the shore into women. I believe that that's like Selkies, like that's an actual mythological element, but they're not called that in this book. They're just called like seal women or whatever. The men on the island are basically seduced by them, but a lot of the times they actually actively go out and seek out the witch to get a wife or a mistress from the sea. And so this book is kind of more told like a short story collection where every section of the book kind of follows a different perspective. So for example, there's one perspective of the witch who transforms these seals, or from a man that has sort of fallen in love or like wanted one of these women, or women who have like moved away from the island because their husbands have literally been cheating on them constantly, and different things like that. So overall, I thought that the concept was quite interesting, but for the execution, I really wasn't so sure on. So my biggest issue really is that I felt like this book didn't fully have a point. Like it was literally just tracking, kind of like almost like a chronicle, like tracking the events relating to the seal women on this island. And that was it. Like there was no arc. There was no resolution. There was no change. There was no character development because we kept changing characters constantly. So it was really just like, this is what happens on this island. You do with that what you will. And while I don't think that's necessarily always a bad thing, in this book it just didn't work for me. Like I was like, well, what's the point? There was a little bit of a point right at the end, and I was like, okay, that's maybe, there's something happening. But overall, for most of this book, I felt very kind of lost as to what it was trying to convey. I was also quite confused about how like this whole entire seal women thing worked, because for a large portion of the book, you're made to believe that these women are sort of like seducing the men away from their wives. Because, for example, one of the seal women actually gives like her boyfriend, I guess, like something to hold on to so that he won't forget her when he does talk to his like betrothed. And it basically just like messes with his mind and like seduces him, I guess. But at the same time, the men on the island have to actually hide away the seal skins of their women, because otherwise they will grab it and return to the sea. So what do they want? Like, what are the motivations behind what these seal women are doing? Do they have any free will? Are they literally just following instincts or urges? Or I don't really know. I felt like that would have been so much more interesting than all this other stuff. Like I would have much rather liked to hear about that, like kind of their struggles, seeing it from their perspective. But they were literally, for the most part, personality-less, thoughtless, beautiful husks of people, of women that were literally just like lust objects to these men. And for me, that was just like not enough. Like, I wished it had been more in depth, I guess, and less shallow in that aspect. So yeah, overall I gave it like 2.5 stars. I think, you know, skip it. Don't read it, really. It's not, probably not worth your time. The next book I'm just gonna mention real quick because it's something I had to read for school, and that is Introducing Interpreting Studies by Franz Pöchhacker. He's actually my teacher, and he made us read this book. Not made us, but like it was part of the exam, so we had to pretty much read it. And I read it. I did skim read like parts of it, but whatever. So as the title suggests, this is a book about the history pretty much of interpreting studies, particularly in the 20th century when it really kind of happened. And it's very detailed. It does its job, like if that's what you're trying, if you're studying for an exam. It's, you know, it is what it is. Let's move on. And my last 3-star read was Dead Mountain by Donnie Eicher. I think that's his name. This is a nonfiction book about a 1959 hiking accident that happened in Russia, I think Siberia or close to Siberia. I don't know. Basically, this young group of like college students that went on a hike. They were very experienced hikers, and they went into like really dangerous territory and ended up disappearing. And then weeks later, when they were found in really, really odd positions. Some of them, they were all outside of their tent, even though their tent was like built and there was stuff in it. And most of them were wearing less or no clothes, and this was like very, very cold temperature. So they pretty much all died of hypothermia. So they were not really wearing appropriate clothing. They were found in weird positions all over the place. Some of them had physical wounds, and it was a super confusing situation for everyone involved. And at the time, they were not able to clear up the case. There was a lot of theories surrounding it, sort of like thinking it's a conspiracy, that they came across something that they shouldn't have seen or something, and then were killed for it or something like that. And there's literally like 50,000 theories surrounding this. And so the author himself went there, I think in 2012 or 13, to do his own research, and he came up with his own hypothesis as to what happened, which he believes, and scientists believe, that is the most likely. It's obviously still speculation, but he does come up with a solution. So in that sense, that's kind of what he recounts in that book. He recounts the investigation from 1959 as well as his own exploration and investigation. And then he also talks a little bit more about the hikers themselves and like tries to reconstruct what might have happened on that trip. So overall, I think it's definitely a very interesting topic. My main issue was really just that I didn't really feel like the book was written very well in like a narrative style. It was very slow paced and really, you know, if you're that interested in the details, that's fine, go read this book. But for me, I felt like retrospectively, I would have much preferred to just like look up the Wikipedia article. I feel like that would have sufficed for me, because I really just wanted to know what happened or like what is supposed to have happened. So I feel like if you just want to know that, you'd be much better served just like looking it up online instead of getting this book and reading it. It's just, I don't know, I just don't think it's necessarily worth it. I much preferred Into Thin Air to this one, by the way. I felt Into Thin Air, you know, it's also a thing that you could just Google, but like the book as a whole, I felt like gave so much extra information and so much detail and was just like so well put together. I really felt like that was worth a read. But with this, I feel like you could skip it. And then we're already at my 4 stars, and my first 4-star read of the month was Cersei by Madeline Miller. This was also the very first book I even picked up this year, and I really, really enjoyed it. I definitely liked it a little bit less than The Song of Achilles, which was one of my favorite books from last year, but I still think that this is definitely a good book and worth a read. It's a retelling of the myth of Cersei, who was a witch that basically turned the men that came to her island into pigs. And I believe in the original Greek myth, she's really just a side character. I don't think there's like an extra like thing written about her. She just appears in like various other myths. And so the author for this like kind of collected those together and like built her own story, like reconstructed her own story out of it. And I think she did a really, really good job of it. The Song of Achilles is very focused on the mortal world, whereas this is more focused on the world of the gods, which I found really interesting. And Cersei is very much exiled and like disparaged by the other gods. So, you know, it kind of shows their cruelty. It kind of just shows her journey as she kind of gets out from under their thumb and like makes a name for herself and like finds herself and finds her purpose and her path and grows into her powers. And I thought that overall, it was a really interesting story of character development. I just really like how complex the character of Cersei is in this book. She's not just like the evil witch that does things for the fun of it, but like there's reasons to her actions, and she's actually a pretty good person compared to most other gods and actually also mortals in the Greek mythology. So she comes out pretty much on top of all of them. The only thing I would say is that this book is really quite slow paced, and there were sections of it that really dragged quite a bit, and you know, that was a little bit tougher to get through. But overall, I really love Madeline Miller's style of writing. I really love the take that she had on Cersei, and I really just enjoyed this book. And if you're interested in Greek myth retellings, I definitely recommend this one. Second to last, I have The Seven Deaths of... Nope. What? Numbers are confusing. Second to last, I read The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. I can't believe it's taken me this long to get to this book because it's been on my shelves for like years, I believe. Basically, this is the story of a man who is, every time that he dies, he is reborn again in his same life, but he can remember all his previous lives. He finds out that there's a society of people that can do this, and they kind of try to help each other out and send messages back and forth in time, I guess, warning of futures to come, whatever. So basically, in this book, at some point, the society called the Cronus Club figures out that somebody is trying to actively speed up the end of the world. So they've known that the world is going to end, but it's happening quicker and quicker in every life, and they need to try and find out why. So that's, I think, kind of the main gist of the book. And the book is very slow paced as well. It literally recounts like most of what happened to Harry in like all of his 15 lives, and you can imagine that's a lot of stuff. It also jumps back and forth between individual lives quite a bit, which is confusing and also annoying at times because the author does it a lot before sort of a climax in the story in one life. She'll just be like, and also, I think I haven't told you about this other thing I did, while you're just like waiting for a big reveal or something like that. It's super frustrating. I do believe the book is really well written in terms of the writing style. It's very creative and definitely not an easy feat to pull off. I think for the most part, Claire North did a really good job. However, if you are like me and you're very not suspicious, but questioning in nature. I have a very questioning nature. I do not take things at face value at all, especially things like this that involve like versions of time travel. I cannot stop myself from taking it apart and like thinking way too much about it and thereby ruining it for myself. So of course, that's also what I did with this book. There were so many plot holes and just things that like did not make sense to me and that were not addressed in the book. And I'm assuming it's because she knew that these were like all very tricky, like pitfalls. And she was just like, I'm just gonna steer clear of this. But it's still all valid questions, I believe, that I have. And it is quite frustrating for me to feel like none of them were even remotely touched upon. At the same time, it really was kind of nice to be challenged by a book this way and to be made to think so much by a book, even if maybe that's the intention, I don't know. But I kind of just felt like that was quite a bit of fun to get to like be this sort of critical person, be like, oh, that doesn't make sense. This doesn't work with this thing. So anyway, if you're interested in all those questions, I have written a pretty extensive Goodreads review, and all of these spoilery things are obviously marked as a spoiler, so I will link that review down below. If you have already read the book, I really recommend that you read it and you let me know your own take on the matter in the comments, either of this video or of that review. I would really like that because I think it's really one of these books that you can just like pick apart and discuss to no end, and I think that's a good thing. Despite the fact that it's frustrating, it's also thought-provoking. And for me, I feel like at the end of the day, I really enjoyed it, had a great time reading it, and I definitely recommend it if you're either not bothered by like time travel, illogical things things at all, or if you're just like me and you just like being challenged. And finally, my favorite book of January was probably more like a 4.5 stars, and that is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This was such a big surprise to me because I honestly picked this book up with the intention of returning it. Well, not the explicit intention, but I was just thinking like, okay, I'm just gonna read it right away or try to read it. If I hate it, I'll just give it back because I've already acquired quite a lot of books that I'm not enjoying, and like I don't need to keep more of them. So that was my intention. What happened is 3 days later, I had bought the entire series. So that didn't quite work out like I thought it would. This book is just a gem of a story. Don't get sidetracked by the tagline. That is very off-putting to me because it says, if you kiss your true love, he will die. So the book, I feel like, kind of writes itself off as like, oh, it's just the romance, when it's really, really not. It's really not, like really not. The book basically follows a girl called Blue, and she is from a family of psychics, so everybody in her family is able to predict the future to some degree, or at least have some premonitions, whatever, but she herself does not have that ability. However, she does act as a catalyst for the powers of her family, so when she's near them, their visions are clearer, or they have more visions or stuff like that. One thing that her family has always predicted about her is that if she does kiss her true love, he will die. That's all they've ever been telling her since she was a kid. She also finds out at the beginning of the book that a boy called Gansey is supposed to die that very year, and she can't just let that happen, so she wants to prevent it. Gansey is a boy, he goes to a school called Aglionby, I think, and the boys at that school are also called the Raven Boys because it's like this really rich, like prep school, I guess, like pre-Ivy League school where only really, really rich kids go to. And, you know, she's always kind of tried to steer clear of that, but now because she knows that this boy is gonna die, she wants to save him. She eventually makes friends with a group of them, including Gansey. There's also Adam, Noah, and Ronan, and they're really good friends. And then kind of Blue comes into it, and they go off on this quest together because Gansey actually has been obsessed with the mythical stories surrounding Scottish kings that have apparently come over to the US to be buried there, or like their bodies have been brought there to be buried on ley lines so that they will be able to rise up again. I believe that that's what it's about. Honestly, it's a little bit confusing, but kind of something like that. They're on the search for something called a king called Glendower, and Blue joins in on that. So basically, that's where the main story kicks off, where they just go off on the search, or like they work together on the search. That's a little bit lengthy, but basically that's like the basic gist of the book or like of the series. The plot is there and it's definitely moving forward, but it's very, very slow paced as well. It's definitely more of a character focused story than a story focused story, and I'm in love with that. I want good characters, and this is one of the few books where I don't mind that there's such a large quantity of main characters. It's literally 5 main characters, and I don't care because especially the Raven Boys, they're all such individuals. They have very unique personalities. They're very well developed. They have very complex personalities. They also have complex relationships with one another, and I just love their whole dynamic. And I just love how much time and effort the authors clearly put into these characters and how detailed oriented she was in her approach. And I'm in love with that. I do feel like Blue is a little bit less developed because a large portion of her character or personality is kind of just made up by her function as a catalyst and her background in like the psychic family. I feel like that is taking center stage when it comes to her, and so there's not a lot of room for her to have her own personality, at least in my opinion, but I'm hoping that that's going to develop and change as well over the course of the books. Overall, I just thought this was a really like lovely book. It was well written, really creative, really, really, really well developed and interesting and likable in their own ways, characters, and I'm obsessed with it. I'm sorry to say, or not sorry to say, I'm obsessed with this book. I think it's fantastic. The only thing I would say is that towards the ending, there's like an arc with a villain that to me felt out of place and a little bit juvenile compared to the rest of the vibe of the book. Like everything else, I was like, okay, I mean, it's YA, but like it's challenging and interesting and different. And then it's like this part of the book, I was like, this is very different. It feels very different. It feels very like, oh, okay, we need to have a villain, so let's have a villain, and we're just gonna deal with that, and then we can move on and go back to what was happening before. So yeah, that was a little off-putting. The reason I gave it 4 stars, not 5. But other than that, I loved it. So if you're like me and you're so tired of the 50 million cardboard cutout characters that we are presented with in YA on a daily basis, definitely check this out. I think you won't regret it. And that is it for my January wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think I had a really good reading month. There definitely were some things I didn't enjoy as much, but overall I feel like I got something out of all of these books. Please let me know in the comments down below how your reading month went. I hope you also read some fantastic books, and I will see you very soon with another video. Until then, have a lovely week. Bye!